Hello everybody, in this video we're going to go ahead and get started by talking about string manipulation. We're going to take this and kind of break it up over the course of a few different videos. So for this one we're just going to be covering a couple different topics, and we will get a little deeper into some other stuff in some other videos. So we are talking about string manipulation, which is working with strings. And in talking about string manipulation, I guess we first should probably talk about, well, what is a string? We've worked with strings before, we've used strings in various things, but we haven't really defined them. But we can really define a string relatively easily in saying that a string can be described as a sequence of characters. And these sequences of characters can have, particular positions. Right? Like if I have the word hello, that is a string, and those characters are in a particular position inside of this string that creates the word hello. But I could take and I could rearrange those characters, and they're still the same characters, but they're rearranged in a different way. The position of those characters are different, and in creating a different position for those characters, we've created a brand new string. So even though our characters are the same, our string is a little different. And we can tell that because, we can read it, right? Like we can read what we have here, and we can determine the information of it visually. But the whole point of string manipulation is trying to be able to work with and use these strings in our programs in different ways. So one of the ways that we might want to be able to do that is by accessing the characters in a string. And today in this video we're going to talk about two different ways that we can access the characters inside of a string. So some common programming tasks really require you to access the individual characters that are contained within a string. Pick out a certain word, pick out a certain letter, so on and so forth. The crux of some of your labs for this module revolve around being able to pick out certain letters within a string, although they'll need a bit more advanced methods than we're using here. You can isolate individual characters within a string by using a for loop, and the target variable in your for loop will assume each character in your string one at a time. So it'll just go through your character one at a time by using this for loop. Again, we are using a for loop here, which is different from what we used in the last module. But I kind of included this here twice so I could reiterate that a for loop is a different type of loop. In the last module, we learned about iteration, and we learned about the while loop and how we use the while loop to kind of iterate over things. And the for loop is basically just a shorthand of that while loop, where we kind of take everything and we put it into one place, and it makes things kind of easier for us in terms of creating a loop and making a loop kind of do the work that we want it to do. So let's get ourselves acquainted with this loop by heading over into a REPL and writing a quick program that takes advantage of the new things that we've learned here and counts the numbers of S characters in the string Sally sells seashells by the seashore. This is going to be a fun challenge. So why don't we just head over to a REPL now. So as you can see here, I've already kind of prepped myself for writing a program. I've already written my shebang, and I've already written my main gate. So I can just come in here and do a little bit of code where I can take advantage of the things that we've learned so far about a for loop and whatnot, working with string manipulation in order to count the number of S characters in Sally sells seashells by the seashore. I chose to do this. Continuing on. So we're going to write a function, and we're going to call it count S. And we're going to give it an attribute of, or an argument of X here. And that X is just going to be the string that we're going to want to enter in. So we can make this a little more flexible. So when we invoke this function, we'll invoke it with Sally sells seashells by the seashore. I'm going to get good at that by the time that I'm done making this video. Let's go ahead and zoom in so we can all see this a little better. So we're going to make this function. We're going to call it count S, and we're going to assign it an argument of X that's going to represent our string. The first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do a little bit of normalization. We're going to want to take everything and make it either uppercase or lowercase. So we want to do this because, well, you know, in our string that we bring in, we could have uppercase letters or lowercase letters, and uppercase letters and lowercase letters are different in the world of programming. You know, they have different ASCII values, so when we're evaluating conditions, whether something is an uppercase letter or a lowercase letter matters. So we want to take everything and convert it to one or another so we can kind of normalize our search and make things a little bit easier on ourselves. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and take the value of X and set it equal to what X would be if everything in it was lowercase. And we could take advantage of the built-in lower function in Python to do that. So what that's going to do for us is that's just going to take everything and make it lowercase. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to make some kind of counting variable, some kind of temporary variable that I can add 1 to every time my for loop encounters an S. So I'm just going to make a variable called S, and I'm going to set it to 0. That way, you know, we kind of know what it is. It's the number of S's. So now I can take advantage of my for loop, and in this instance, I'm going to write for I being whatever. We can name this whatever we want. You know, this is just like declaring a new variable here. When we say I is kind of common when we're doing something like this because we can kind of use I to stand for iteration. So we use I relatively commonly in this sort of situation. But we could name this whatever we wanted to. Like if we wanted to, we could write for letter in X or whatever we wanted to do. And this is just going to be how we choose to write this for loop to iterate through our string. And we can write for I in X. So for I in X is going to go through every letter or every character in string X. And for every letter in string X, we're going to check a condition. So if I equals S, we're going to add 1 to our S variable. So S plus equals 1. We'll go ahead and use our shorthand. And then when everything's all said and done, we will return the value of S. Just like that. So that's all we need to do to count the number of S's in Sally sells seashells by the seashore. I promise I'm going to get good at this by the time that I'm done. So let's go ahead and invoke this in main and in our main gate and see what happens. So we're going to put it in a print statement. So print count S, and we're going to put our string in as our argument. So Sally sells seashells by the seashore. So that capital S in the name Sally, that's going to get converted to a lowercase s, so it can still be compared against the lowercase s that we have in our if statement. That's inside of our for loop. And then we'll also count all the other s's that are in this. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 s's. So if we run this, we should get 8 returned to us in our console. And just like that, we got an 8. So that's perfect. So this is a good time to pause. If you want to pause, get caught up with the code with where we're at right now. This is one way that we can work through and iterate through all of the letters in a string. Let me go ahead and zoom back out. But there are other ways that we can do this as well. And another way that we can do this is via string indexing. So another way to analyze a string is to use indexing notation. Indexing is a way to reference individual elements within a string based on their position. So you can create an index by placing an integer value inside a pair of square brackets after your string variable. And so indexes always start with 0. We call this the location of your character, your index location of your character. Indexes always start with 0, and they count up from there, starting from your first character forward. So the first character in a string is known as the 0th element in a string. But you can also index backwards, insofar as saying, well, when indexing backwards, the last letter of the string is in index location -1. So let's talk about this index location. Let's dive into it a little bit more. Let me draw for you how this index location works. So let's take for a minute, let's consider the word program. Program. Cool. Now let's say this word program is a string variable, and we've assigned it to the value of, for our purposes, let's just say x. Now each one of these letters in program has a specific index location. So we said that we always start out, when we're going from the first character up, we always start out at 0. So this is index location 0, index location 1, index location 2, index location 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right? So if we were to make a reference to x index 3, let's say, that's going to be equal to our 0, 1, 2, 3rd index location, which is G. Now remember, since we start at 0 instead of 1, G is actually the 4th letter in our string. It's something that, you have to keep on your mind. You have to keep into consideration as you think about all of this, because, it's kind of easy to get confused. So if we're going to reference x at the index location of 3, that's our G. But we can also go the opposite way. So if we wanted to take our index locations from right to left instead of left to right, we'd start at our letter M. Letter M would be -1, A would be -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7. So in this instance, not only is G the index location for x equals, or x to the index location of 3, but it's also x index -4. So that's how we work with our strings and our index locations here. So when we work with indexing with a string, we can do basically the exact same stuff that we did previously with string indexing instead of with a for in loop that we did previously. We can iterate over a string using indexing. Most of the times, we don't know how long a string is when we begin to examine it. So one of the things we need to know about then is the len function in Python. We can easily count the number of characters in a string using the len function. So we can take and use that len function to set a lower range and an upper range for a for loop to create bounds for iteration. And we can do essentially the exact same thing that we just did for our for in loop, just in a slightly different manner. So let's revisit our program that we made here. But this time, let's write another function. This one we'll call def count underscore index. And we'll give it the argument of x, just like we did previously. We're going to do the exact same thing with this function that we did with our previous function. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to normalize our string. So we're going to set x to x.lower. And then we're going to go ahead and find the length of the string. So we're going to create a new variable. I'm going to call it x underscore len. And I'm going to set it equal to the value of the length of x. So that's len x in parentheses. And that's going to run a function on the string of x, whatever we put in as our argument. In this case, Sally sells seashells by the seashore. I'm getting better at it. And it'll return a count of all of the characters that are in that string. So we'll add our temporary counting variable here. And then we'll write our for loop. For I in range from 0 to x underscore len. So whereas before, when we did our iteration, we were doing an iteration for the letter in the string, now we're doing an iteration for a number in a range of numbers between 0 and the length of our string. Now it goes up to, but doesn't include that top number, which is helpful because remember that we're starting at 0 instead of 1. So that is kind of perfect for us when it comes to programming and what we want to do here. So everything else here is going to look exactly, or mostly exactly the same. The only thing that's going to look different is how we reference the character. Because at this point, right, the character isn't the I value anymore. The I value is an integer. It's a number. So we'll have to reference it as an index location inside of string x. So x index I. So if x index I equals s, then we're going to add 1 to the value of our counting variable s. And then when all of that's said and done, we're going to return s. So now we can just take and we can just replace that method invocation, that function invocation, with an invocation for count index. We're going to count the exact same thing. And so because we're going to count the exact same thing, let me just clear out my console here. Because we're going to count the exact same thing, we should get the exact same result. We should get oops. 1 x dot lower there. Didn't notice it as I did it, but there we go. We got an 8. So we got the exact same thing. So here would be a good place to pause to see this other version. So we did two things the exact same way here. But in doing them the exact same way, one of the big things that we can take from this is how we can utilize the skills that we did in here for different purposes. One of the interesting things that you can do with a for I in range is that you can iterate through and count the index location of where the S's are. So you could go back and find them later. Or you could go back and do various other things that are a little bit easier. Using one way or another gives you more flexibility to do certain things. And we can also use these for loops for other purposes outside of just string manipulation. We can use them for calculations. We can use them for a lot of the same things that we were using our while loops for. We just have to format things in a similar manner. So that's all that I have for you for this video. Thank you for watching.